Hi, everyone. Today, I'm especially happy to honor my friend and colleague, Daphne Lay, Professor of Drama. She has been an absolutely extraordinary collaborator in Illuminations. She served as interim director of the program, and she has sponsored and co-sponsored so many innovative programs. Tonight, we celebrate Daphne's work. This is her amazing new book. It's called Uncrossing the Borders, Performing Chinese in Gendered Transnationalism. It is her third monograph, and it is a riveting study of border-crossing women in Chinese theater and opera. The book covers 2 millennia of artistic works in a dozen genres and in multiple locations, including Sinophone Asia and the United States. Tonight, she's going to share some insights from her research. And then her colleagues, Hu Ying from East Asian Studies and Qitao Guo from History, both from the School of Humanities, will offer responses. And you can pose your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So please join me in welcoming Daphne Lay.
Thank you, Julia, for your introduction and for organizing this event. And thank you, Hu Ying and Qitao, for joining me today. And I also want to thank Center for Asian Studies and Illuminations and Department of Drama and Claire Trevor School of the Arts. So what is this book about? It's about border crossing. Border crossing is about action. And drama is about action. Or if you were Aristotle, it's about the imitation of an action. And my study is about border crossing drama based on Chinese drama, based on historical border crossing events. My major intervention here is to integrate gender and sexuality into the discourse of border crossing and nationalism. When nationalism became gendered, the dramatic border crossing action incited violence against women, which is usually in the form of suicide, which also ultimately stops the border crossing action altogether. So in other words, whereas there is the attempt to the attempt to cross the border, ultimately the major dramatic action is actually about the interruption of the crossing. It is about the non-action, but not about the action. And I argue that it is the uncrossing that creates the unique combination of space and time, and for heightened theatricality that makes this genre immortal. So violation of a woman's bodies is a very popular dramatic trope in many cultures. And in border crossing plays, this woman is on a peace diplomatic mission to unite China and its northern neighbor with her body in an intercultural marriage. However, on stage, she always kills herself before crossing the borders. So my first question is, why, for 2 millennia, women were expected to die this way, both in literature and on stage? And my second question is, so what are we going to do with all these sad stories, which are often regarded as historical truth? Are there ways to listen to the silenced and erased feminine voices from the past? Are there ways to rewrite and reconstruct histories that we don't know about? So part of my research is really to find the intricate connections between these different texts and between different characters. And I also advocate a kind of smart and attentive and creative listening from the audience and readers. Listening to the silence, listening to the void, listening across space and time. And ultimately, it is to find a way to rewrite history. So you can see in the PowerPoint here, this is kind of my general outline of today's talk. I'm gonna start talking about a few major concepts, and then I will move into the characters, and we'll be showing a little bit of video clips. So next slide, please. First of all, I want to talk about the idea of China. China in this study is both historically grounded, such as in the Han Dynasty, a specific historical event, but it is also imagined and performed. In this kind of imaginary China, it is patriarchal, it is Han-centric. Han is the ethnic majority. And then it is also the view from the center. The idea of the name for China, 中国, the word 中 actually means center. So 中国, which translates as central state or central country, is an old concept, more than 2,000 years old. The idea that China is always in the center, surrounded by neighboring barbarians. So whenever I use the word barbarian or barbaric in my talk, just please remember to put the quotation marks around them, because this is from the Han-centric point of view. So in this way, we can think about no matter what the territory is, where the capital is, China, the Han China always holds this kind of central position. How do you define the center position? It is similar to Edward Said's idea of Orientalism. You define yourself by defining the other. So by defining the inferior, the barbaric neighbors, China sits in the center position of the universe. So in this way, China, in these stories, this group of stories, basically we're talking about the northern neighbors. Historically, it's called the Xiongnu, and it's pretty much in the space, the current space about Mongolia and a little beyond. And then this is from the Han Dynasty. So these are the familiar barbarian, the northern barbarians in this group of place. Next slide, please. So this is a picture from the 17th century. This is from an anonymous play called Appeasing the Barbarians. It shows the fighting between Chinese and the barbaric soldiers. And you can see the difference between these two figures. On the left, it is a Han soldier who's clean shaven, who's on foot, and on the right is the barbaric soldier. It's on horse, and it has a lot of facial hair, and it also has the pheasant feathers on the head. So the facial hair and the fur and pheasant feathers are the stage symbols for barbarian. And also their the way they talk, very often they use gibberish, they use kind of imagined Mongolian, and then they're always depicted as rough and sometimes cruel, and they have bad smell, and they have uncivilized behavior. Next slide, please. And this one shows a few more pictures about the contrast between the barbarians. And now in this case, it's with the woman, the Chinese woman. And this woman is Wang Zhaojun, the central character of this group of plays. She's on the horse, and then you can see that she has already changed into the Xiongnu outfit, because you can see little furs on her collar. And then in the picture on the right, you can also see her having pheasant feather on her head. So traditionally, since this is about the border crossing between this is a national border crossing, right? So it is very often seen as a kind of political allegory. The first of this kind of plays happened in the Yuan dynasty. That was the first dynasty in China when the whole China was occupied by a foreign ethnic group, the Mongols. So during this time, 13th century, when this kind of plays happened, it is very easy to interpret it as a political allegory. The barbarians in this place are seen as the current, the contemporary Mongol rulers. Next slide, please. So in this one, this is from the Qing Dynasty. Qing Dynasty is the second dynasty in Chinese history that was ruled by a foreign ethnic group. So in this picture, you can actually see the outfit of the Qing officials. So Qing Dynasty was ruled by the Manchus. So traditionally, you will imagine when people see this kind of plays on stage, they will imagine the barbarians are the metaphor of the current Manchu rulers. But it is really interesting to see this because when you see these two official figures in the foreground of the picture, they are in the Manchu official outfit, but then they are identified as Chinese, not as barbarians. So what happened? So this is a play I found in actually Academia Sinica in Taipei, and it's the folk play at the turn of the 20th century. So let's see the next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. What happened is now we have a new kind of barbarians. From mid-19th century, Western imperialism was the major threat for China. So now the traditional barbarians, the land barbarians coming from the north, are no longer there because now we have the new barbarians. They are from the ocean. They're the Westerners. So these two slides, this one and the next one, are from Dian Shizhai Huabao, which is a news journal from the late 19th century. So this is kind of sort of like newspaper, sort of like tabloid magazine, which very often shows some kind of news event with a sensationalism. So in this picture, we actually see, no, go back, please. Yeah, in this picture, we actually see the British men visiting a brothel. And these prostitutes were actually terrified by their behavior. So as we can imagine, usually people identify prostitutes as the lowest in the society, but even the lowest of Chinese society could not tolerate the Western barbarians' behavior. So this shows like how superior China was. Next one, please. The next one is it's from the same news journal, and it is about French. So this was about a French drunken sailor, and again, with very uncivilized behavior. And the Chinese men were fleeing from him. So during this time in 19th century, and we started seeing the Westerners identified as barbarians. So the original barbarians, the non-Han ethnic group, are identified as Chinese. So it's a very interesting shift here. And in this depiction of the Western barbarians, usually they are tall. They also have facial hair. They very often, there's description of very strange colors about their hair and about their eyes. They are the new barbarians. They are unfamiliar and very often very frightening. And also when the barbarians are different, the idea of borders is also different. during this time, we begin to see words like ocean appear in such drama. Because traditionally, this is about the northern China. This is about the land barbarian. It's about crossing the Great Wall, or maybe there's a river, but there was never an ocean. But now we see, even with the same stories, they will use words like ocean, and sometimes they use words like guns, like cannons, to describe their barbarians. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? I want to explain a little bit about the idea of women, sex, and nation. Sex is the foundation of nationalism, because when we think about the idea of a lineage, ethnic purity, miscegenation, and all these concepts are about controlled sex. So how does a nation control sex? Of course, they control their women. Traditionally, men take up the position of defending a nation. So when a nation is in crisis, or when a nation is actually defeated, male anxiety runs high. And the desire to control women's body become even stronger. So when they cannot do anything about the nation, at least the men can still control the women, and Chinese women will die for the country. So this is a very interesting idea in order for border crossing drama to work. It's actually a kind of double wishful thinking. So first of all, you're gonna have a beautiful Chinese woman who volunteers to go to the border to marry the foreign king. And right before she crosses the border, she will kill herself. So this is the first wishful thinking. The second wishful thinking, and this is from the Han centrism kind of point of view, is the barbarian king is inevitably enlightened by the woman's Chinese virtue and will unconditionally surrender to China. So there's peace and there's a happy ending. And all we need to do is to sacrifice one woman. So this kind of double wishful thinking has been going on for this drama, this type of drama. Next slide, please. Now I want to spend some time explaining about the idea of border and border crossing in this specific genre. So when border scholars talk about borders, usually it's not about the border. Usually it's about the borderland that we're talking about. So the idea of the borderland is it's a liminal space. It's neither here nor there, but it's both here and there. It's kind of in between place. It's according to Gloria Anzaldúa, and then it's a vague and undetermined space created by the emotional residue of an unnatural boundary, and then it's always in the state of transition. So the border crossing action creates this idea of a borderland. And then in this drama, this borderland is the liminal space between nations, between ethnicities, and between cultures. And the liminality is highly theatrical because a woman can flirt with both sides. She's neither nor, but she's also either or. She's neither, but she's also both. And in my study, there are a few different things I want to talk about borders. So the border basically, traditionally, it's the northern border. So it's the Great Wall. And as I said, sometimes there's a river. Of course, the river doesn't run along the Great Wall so conveniently. But in drama, that's always the case. And we can imagine in drama, a river can create so much more opportunities for dramatic actions to happen. You could have a libation ritual, you can have a boating kind of stage business, you can have drowning, you can have purification. So in drama, there's very often a river. And then there's the idea of portable border. when Chinese women are not supposed to cross the border, they are supposed to kill themselves. But when they do cross the national, geographical, and ethnic borders, they are carrying the gendered border with them. So this is the idea of the portable border. No matter where they go, gender is the border that they carry with them. So they can always be, if they survive the border crossing, they will be ashamed, they will be shamed for their survival. And the idea of affect and affective border crossing, this is something that's I want to explain, because when we think about border, it could be a wall, it could be a river, it could be a pass, it could be, right? But then a line, even though it is a stable border, we can defend ourselves that way. There are things that will cross the border that we cannot stop. For instance, sound, for instance, smell. So very often we can think about for border crossing, we might, even though the characters are still on this side of the border, they might smell the smell of goat, for instance, which is considered as an unbearable smell, 腥膻. Or they can hear the sound. It could be music, or it could be noise. This kind of affect penetrating and transcend borders, it could heighten the danger, the urgency of border crossing. But sometimes it's also an alternative way to seek intervention from superpower or from supernatural. Very often, women will also use music to reach the divine in such a way. So in other words, border crossing is not always it's not always a lateral action. Very often, it becomes a three-dimensional action. And finally, I want to explain the idea of embodied border, because of this liminal space is the place that dramatic actions can happen. And also because Chinese opera, traditional Chinese theater, does not really have scenery and set. So everything is embodied. So this is the case when we see the border landscape, for instance, when it is about the desert, or it's about a very rugged landscape, and crossing the border becomes very difficult. So you can see that this is excuse for a very difficult dance or very difficult stage movement. Finally, I will also want to talk about the idea of time and space in the liminality. This is an important concept because we know this woman, we anticipate her suicide. And so her life is cut short. So here I use the music concept of tempo rubato, which is to borrow time or stolen time. She borrows time from the future, or she steals time from the future to buy her space now. So now she's alone at the borderland with the stolen time, and the audience have patience to watch her. It seems that time has stopped, and she can use this time to linger, to sing, to dance, to embody the border crossing, to do her ritual, to write a letter. It can go on and on. In one novel, the border crossing scene actually takes 16 years. She lingers at the border for 16 years with all the excuses. And so that's why I say this is a very interesting concept, that the time and space seem to be in this unique combination, because we know her future time is cut short, and we allowed her to have the space to speak. Okay, next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about music and listening. Music is important here, not because everyone sings, but because music is used as a dramaturgical device. So in here, because traditionally men have the word, have the symbolic order, and women don't. So music seems to be a way to think about as a kind of a magical shortcut that will be able to reach the divine, to communicate, to summon kind of a ghost and spirit from the past. And the important part of the music is also this ton of knowing the music and knowing the heart. These two things, 知心 and 知音, are seen as identical. So through music, the women could build a kind of solidarity among them. So that's why I'm trying to find the connection between the women and trying to imagine how we could connect ourselves with the women in the characters by listening. Okay, next please. So we have 4 characters for this genre. I'm just gonna go through them very quickly. The major character is Wang Zhaojun, is this woman. The quote I have here is the earliest historical record of her. And she was a court lady and was married to the Xiongnu to be the queen. And she had 1 son with them, with the king. And then after her husband died, she married another husband and had 2 daughters. This is the earliest thing we knew about her, even though this is already about 100 years of her existence. We don't know whether there's no mentioning of suicide. There's no mentioning of her lament and all that kind of thing. But it's only in drama she became this person who commits suicide. Next, please. And Taiyan is the other woman. She was very talented. She was good at music. However, she had a terrible life. She was abducted by the Xiongnu soldiers, and she stayed in the Xiongnu land for 12 years and got married there and had 2 children. But then she was brought back by the Chinese prime minister. And so she had to leave her children behind because her children were considered barbarians. So this is the case that in her, in the drama about her, it's always about her children, right? Her motherly love and children, and also about her survival. People always shame her for her survival. She should have committed suicide herself. Okay, let's actually skip the next few slides. I just wanna go to 17, please. I just want to talk a little bit about the connection between the women. In this play, so we can see the contrast between Wang Zhaojun, who committed suicide, who's a favorite, but Taiyan, who didn't commit suicide, so she's ashamed. So in this play, Taiyan, who's a woman who's kneeling on the ground, she visits Wang Zhaojun's tomb, and Wang Zhaojun actually appears as a ghost. So this is like a rare connection between these 2 women. However, you can see a hierarchy here. The person who's committed suicide who's a favorite is on higher position, and Taiyan is at the lower position, kneeling on the ground. Next slide, please. And this is a play, a contemporary play by Wang Anqi, 2007. In this play, these 2 women were brought together on the same footing, and they actually have a kind of chit chat between the women. And so this is like the first play they're actually together at the same place. So let's go to the next play. Next slide, please. So here, I wanted to imagine from the place there's a hierarchy between the 2 women to the place that they are actually brought together as equal. I want to use this concept for my book cover. So actually, I showed this concept and I talked to my sister, BT Beatrice Lay, and she designed the cover for me. So the picture you see is designed by her. So I'm gonna end my talk here. Do we have time to show some video, Julia?
I think it would be good to see just a few minutes just for us to get a flavor of it. And
Okay.
if we need to go a little bit over today, that's okay, because this is a special evening in honor of Daphne Lay.
So, so Kyle, the first one, I'm just gonna show maybe like a 30 seconds. So the first one is by Hong Xianyu, who's, this is, I couldn't find the exact date, but this is probably from the 1980s. So this is a typical border crossing scene. She's only playing the pipa and just lamenting her fate. And it's like a very quiet kind of border crossing.
Is there sound?
We can stop here. So basically, she's just lamenting her fate and saying farewell to her homeland. And the next one is by Shang Xiaoyun, and which is a Beijing opera production, and this was in 1962. So Shang Xiaoyun was one of the female impersonators. So because he also has some kind of martial training, so this thing is presented as much more, I will say, like more martial with more action. And a famous, so as I said, this is a liminal space, right? When anything can happen, and in this kind of border crossing action, because Chinese women usually are not used to riding horses, so it takes a while for them to get used to riding the horses. And then the horseman, which is on the right, also has all this acrobatic action to show. One is how terrible the landscape is, how difficult the crossing is, and another thing is how the horses are wild. It takes some time to tame the horse. So let's just watch a couple of minutes. The horse whip actually means horse. You can stop. You can stop here. So what it was saying is, you can see it was very difficult. At the end of that section, the horse was not willing to go, because the horse is not going to cross the border. So she had to say, so just add more whips, and so the horse will continue going. Let's see the next one. Next one is a dance drama. It's actually just 2016. Let's just watch it for 1 minute. Okay, we can stop here. I just want to show that during the border crossing, the liminal space, that there's all this possibility of extra theatricality. Okay.
Great, that was wonderful, Daphne. I'm so glad you were able to share the clips as well as the amazing illustrations and ideas from your book. We're now going to have Hu Ying and Shitao go join us, and they're going to just make a few comments, perhaps ask you a question or two. So maybe our panelists can join us.
All right. Thank you, Daphne, for this fascinating talk, shining a real bright light on the theatrical moment of female border crossing and suicide at the border. This is really, I've really enjoyed reading your book, very richly researched project, and offers so much insight into the intersection of empire, sexuality, and theater. So I'm gonna ask 3 questions. They're sort of comments and questions. One is on female chastity, since that is such a central topic here. The other one, I would just simply like to know more about the use of music. And the last question has to do with Maxine Kingston's Woman Warrior. Many of you may have read this book, where she plays on a border crossing female. All right, so first about interracial marriage and female chastity. Ideas about these matters changed a great deal, meaning the morality codes tightened greatly, basically right around the time when theater became really big in China. Things that were considered perfectly okay, you know, a widow remarriage, for example, was increasingly frowned upon until it became practically a crime. So then I really enjoy how you pull this thread out, showing us how historical stories of these women were reformulated in theatrical versions, where either you kill yourself, or if you didn't, you became this very shameful figure. So I would like to hear more about this, especially how modern productions deal with this changing ideas of female chastity.
Mhm.
All right, the other point that I was fascinated by is music, not just the actual music, but the idea and the image of music. In your book, you described Chinese theater as total theater. I really like how you use this framework in which total theater, meaning that singing, dancing, costume are interconnected to produce a theatrical experience. Connected to this framework, you also introduce the idea of affective border crossing, which you talked a bit about in just now. So you're calling it the border of sound. So music, especially of reed pipe and pipa, now both of which originally were not Chinese, so that they therefore signal a kind of barbarian culture. In this context, how does the sound of music work? You know, for both Wang Zhaojun and Taiyan, for example, in the clip that you showed, when Wang Zhaojun was supposed to be playing the pipa, what we hear in the actual music, I'm no musician, so I'm probably wrong. I mean, it sounded to me like yangqin and erhu. And the pipa is not actually heard, and it is rarely heard on Chinese theater stage, right? So have you seen, I mean, here's a pure curiosity point. Have you seen any regional theater where pipa or the reed pipe is ever even used? Or are they only presented on stage in a sort of mock playing gesture, meaning the actors or actresses simply make the motion of playing it? Okay, last point. You yourself have done a great deal of work on Asian American theater, so I really would love to hear your thoughts on this. In The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston, Taiyan's story, the one who didn't kill herself at the border, take on this very different shape, right? So she was shown to be unable to communicate with the barbarians surrounding her, barely able to communicate with her own children who did not know her language. But then in that last scene, it was so moving when Taiyan started singing the song. The barbarians understood her, understood the sorrow in her music, and they chimed in with their music, and so did her children. So just wanted to hear your take on this particular border crossing woman and border crossing writing by Maxine Hong Kingston. Thank you. It was a great talk. Really enjoyed it and enjoyed your book.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, there are so many questions. Okay, the idea of chastity, I think, yes, you're right. The changing idea of chastity during the time when the border crossing happened in the Han Dynasty, it was a total different kind of idea about chastity compared to later to the Ming Dynasty, for instance. Right, the moral code was so much higher and stricter, and the whole idea of lianyu, the virtuous women and all that kind of thing. But I think I want to connect the idea of chastity with nation, because it's not about the woman who's like remarry and all that kind of thing in society is one thing, but when you connect that to the nation, the idea is about the purity of the woman. It's about the purity of the nation, right? So therefore, when Wang Zhaojun, when she kills herself in drama, and that's that perfect example for the nation to uphold her chastity and then nationhood and all together. And when Taiyan fails to do so, and it's the opposite. And Taiyan was actually already a widow, and then she married the Xiongnu king, and then she was brought back to be married again. So she married 3 times in her life. And then during her time, I did not see any kind of historical reference of shame and of any criticism about her chastity, about her violation of the body. Mostly it's about like her writing and then her sorrow, her music, and all that kind of thing. But in drama, it became the major criticism of her, because I want to see this kind of drama is about nationalism. It's about the nationhood. That's why chastity is connected to this idea that it's not about virginity, but it's about you can only have that one time, right? You marry to the nation, and then you cannot be remarried. That's a basic idea. And as for pre-modern drama, it's basically holding that idea. But in modern drama, of course, again, we're thinking about nationalism. So in modern drama, when the foreign barbarians became the ethnic minority in Republic of China and in People's Republic of China, right? So now all these old barbarians like Xiongnu and all these other people become part of the nation, right? So now chastity is not the most important part. Now the idea of happily living together, ethnic, unity becomes the national discourse. Therefore, in the modern drama, you often don't see her killing herself, right? Like spoken drama, not in traditional form, right? Spoken drama or all these rewrites of the modern drama. But that's another way of talking about nation, because now we're not killing this woman. We have this woman who goes to the Xiongnu happily, and because she's on this mission, and she's very happy to learn about their culture. So it's just a big happy family. So I just find that it's away from chastity, away from this old idea of womanhood, but still this woman is used as a political tool to talk about nation. It's still part of the national narrative. It's just a different kind of narrative. So that's kind of like the modern idea about this woman's body. Total theater and music and affect. Chinese theater traditionally is all about music, because everything is song, right? So music is always there. But in this group of play, I would really want to talk about the dramaturgical function of music, right? So it's not so much about hearing the music, but it's about talking about hearing the music. It's about when you hear the music in play, something happens, right? So that's why, as I said, music is kind of like this magical shortcut to connect people, to cross the border, to penetrate, to reach the divine, to summon the emperor. For instance, when Wang Zhaojun was in the Cold Palace, right? She plays the pipa, and then the emperor heard that, and then so that's how he met her. So it's a dramaturgical function of the music, and as you pointed out rightly, that it's the musical instrument is a prop, right? It's not a real instrument. It's not. They don't even use a real instrument. They use a prop, and then they never play. The actors never play the instrument. And as you know that, yes, very often you hear a little bit of pipa sometimes, right, on the set, or the repipe. Sometimes you hear a little bit in the background, right? But because repipe, you have to blow. You cannot sing and play repipe at the same time, right? So it's always heard in the background. And pipa, you can kind of gesture and sing, but they never play. The actors never even play. So it is interesting that it is the dramaturgical function of the music that I'm talking about instead of real music. And yes, these two instruments are not from China originally. However, Taiyan, they play qing, right? Qing or yao qing. So that is a Chinese instrument. But that one seems to be, it's more associated with her like early life. She played that. The Asian American connection is really interesting because I really have different ways of thinking about that. One is somehow the Chinese center kind of point of view is still there because they keep referring to the foreigners, not foreigners, Americans as ghosts. That they very often use the word ghost, and then some Chinese Americans, sometimes you hear them using words like ghosts or like foreigners to refer to Americans, which is really interesting because we are in America, but why do you call Americans foreigners? Because you're thinking they are still foreigners, you're still carrying the kind of center idea with you, right? So on the one hand, I'm seeing that, but on the other hand, you also, understand certain things. It's like translation. Something is translatable, something's not translatable, but somehow, as you say, like the sorrow, like the sound, and somehow those things can transcend language. This is also something that in the last play I talked about by Wang Anqi, the two women meet. They talk about their motherly love. They talk about, even though there was all this terrible experience, difficult experience, but they could both, they can be connected with their children, right? So the idea of motherhood and children. So yeah, so that was just a very quick, very quick answer. Yeah.
So Shitao, did you want to make it just a quick? We're running a little bit late.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That it appears that we are running out of time. That I will be quick. That I just raised. Okay. Thank you. First, thank you so much for this fascinating talk based on a solid, wonderful book that develops some new concepts. One of those that, I'm a China historian, I'm going to raise two questions. That first, that this kind of Orientalism in reverse. China, in this case, is at the center, and Northern barbaric tribal peoples were viewed as kind of uncivilized. So that this is my question: that in the Qing Dynasty, why did these plays? Why were these plays allowed to staged? Why the ruling class was the ruling people were the Manchus, who were considered uncivilized, barbaric. This is one question. The question is, how did the Manchus police kind of stage? Second question has to do with that, why was it women who represented Chinese culture, civilized culture, that kind of instead of man versus kind of uncivilized kind of barbaric man? These are two questions.
Okay. I know we're running out of time, so let me just answer. I'm going to answer the first question and probably. So for the Qing Dynasty, actually for the Yuan Dynasty as well, somehow right. Chinese theater are somehow kind of, I don't, somehow they are out of the peripheral vision or something, because you don't really see any kind of interruption from the government talking about you cannot have theater. Well, yes, from time to time you have things about moral codes, about people should not gather together, or almost every play is banned at one time in history. So that's just nothing new. But you also, in the Qing Dynasty, you also see that there somehow the Manchurian officials, they kind of snuck into the theater wanting to watch the plays, and then they got caught. So I kind of feel it's kind of like a separate space. And then also in theater, almost, this is kind of like for my first book I talk about, whenever theater happens, China happens. Because in theater, there's a kind of an eternal China, because the people wear the same kind of costume. They don't really change. It's Qing is Ming, it's Yuan. They always wear the similar costume. Once in a while, they pick something different, right? So there's kind of eternity there. But somehow it is kind of outside the governance of the governor of the Qing government, and they don't really like interfere much. So that's kind of like from my research.
I have a special presentation to make, and so I'm hoping that, and I want to thank Beatrice Lay for helping me with this. So we will have time for a couple of questions, but I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to share this. Professor Wang Anqi, her play has been mentioned several times, and it is featured on the beautiful cover of Daphne's book. And she is a professor at National Taiwan University. And we actually have a short statement from her about the book and about the play and her work. So we wanted to share that with everyone. So please enjoy.
各位好，这话是我在2006年新编的实验京剧，它的首演是在国家剧院的实验剧场。这个剧名我就取得比较白话哈，青冢前的对话。那么演的是什么呢？是王昭君跟蔡文姬这两个人物跨时空的灵魂私语。王昭君是被迫嫁入匈奴和番的，蔡文姬是被匈奴左贤王俘虏成婚的，而12年后又被接回汉朝。这两位女子走过同样的由汉入番的行程，而文姬却多了一趟回程。我假设回汉朝的文姬经过昭君的坟墓，昭君的灵魂会不会邀文姬在坟前小坐？青冢是昭君的坟，传说大漠黄沙中，这个坟却终年常青，所以在黄沙中唯一的一方青草嫩芽前，两个女子的对坐谈心，是这出戏整个的情调。而这出戏从女性的心灵探索入题，我更想对文学的力量做一番纠结。今天我们是透过历史和文学来认识昭君，可是昭君的形象都是男性塑造而成的。男人心目中的完美昭君，必须要为国牺牲，出塞和番，出塞的时候必须要对汉王依依不舍，一到边界又必须投河自尽，保全他的贞洁。死后的昭君还必须思念汉王，魂归故国。可是真实的昭君是这样吗？出塞的时候，昭君心里想什么？我在想，她应该只是想，我要做什么才能让我自己在绝境中扳回一局。所以我让她唱：收起千般怨，开镜对朱颜，重调朱粉朱唇点，斜插金凤捻金簪。昭君就如同盛张羽翅的开屏孔雀，凭自己的美貌赢了这一局。而文姬赢过昭君的地方，在于她自有文学的彩笔来写自身。今天我们认得的文姬，是文姬自己的笔塑造的，昭君却任人宰割。文姬在文学史上留下有名的诗篇，而我想探究的是，这些诗篇是文姬的真情告白，还是对自己的某种美化矫饰？文学具备十足的创造力，文学也隐含了十足的矫饰性。所以青冢前的对话，我用了写仿，也用了后设，来探讨人生历史的真实虚幻。非常感谢雷碧伟教授把这出戏做了如此深入的论述跟评析，我觉得非常的荣幸，也恭喜碧伟完成了这么重要的学术论著。
Wow, she's my idol.
Well,
Really,
we
really.
include her here.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah,
when she had this play, I actually flew back to Taiwan 2006 to see this play because this was so important. And then, I cannot thank her enough, not just for writing this play, but also for basically rescuing the Taiwan Jingju, right? The Jingju in Taiwan, because she's just wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Julia, for doing this.
Well, thank Beatrice Lay, who provided that and is here today in the audience. And this is from Catherine Mazur. And she says, wonderful research and theory. Could you say a bit more about the two women relationship and how or if this might problematize the border or perhaps extend the opposition of borders? And she also asks, could you explain about the 3D expanded notion of what crosses the border, like sound and affect? How does the female character intersect or penetrate these embodied borders, or does she create this supernatural possibility?
The two women, historically, they are 200 years apart, right? So they were not together historically. But because of the similar theme, they are always connected, especially for Taiyan, the woman who crossed the border. People always compare her to the earlier one and asking her, why didn't you commit suicide? A slide I skipped about the two paintings, two scrolls depicting a procession of like border crossing action, and one is going north, one is coming back, and these two scrolls are almost identical, but then they are depicting a different, the opposite direction. And then also in the Ming Dynasty, Chen Yuzhao also, yes, yeah. So these two almost the same structure, and but the top one is the woman who looks like she's crying. So we imagine that is Wang Zhaojun going north. To be married, and then the one from the bottom, this woman is like composed and calm, and then also when you see the first cluster on the right side, there's a baby horse following the mummy horse, right? So which is kind of telling us that even the horse can take the baby with her, but she cannot take her babies with her when she comes back to China. Yeah, the top one, the top scroll, people believe is a copy of the bottom one. Because for Wang Zhaojun, she has no children at that point. Why is there this symbolism of a baby horse there? Right? The baby horse doesn't make sense in the top picture. So people believe this is maybe a copy of that, or maybe both of them are copies of an earlier picture. So their stories are just basically really intertwined. So just to answer Catherine's question, yeah. For the 3D thing, is there's just so much that goes beyond just a simple border crossing, because as I said, music, affect, and then very often the music can reach the divine, which means it goes up to the gods, to the spirits, and then the gods can use some kind of superpower to rescue the woman for a certain way, right? So it's a different kind of border crossing, and then it is very often through music, and you can achieve this effect.
Well, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much, Daphne and Shitao and Hu Ying, and thank you for this wonderful book. And we're really just very proud to have this be part of our learning this year. And we want to learn more from you. So